Tenants and advocates are upset after more and more landlords are starting to charge so-called junk fees in order to make ends meet. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over some of the fees that landlords have been charging their tenants, right? Now, I believe there's a good reason why landlords have been starting to charge more fees and fees for different things, and that has to do with our inability to cover our costs by simply raising rents in a lot of locations. So, if you go to a place like New York, for example, right, where they have rent control over a large portion of the rental properties, right? How do you make up for that? Well, you might have to charge tenants fees for certain things that you normally wouldn't have to charge because the rents are able to actually cover the costs. So, in my case, if I have to go out there in one of my units and unlock the door because you lost your key, well, guess what? There's a lockout fee, or to go out there and let you in. So, that was it written into my lease. Now, some people might say that's not fair. Oh, no, the landlord shouldn't be able to charge anything extra. Well, there's a lot of good reasons why this stuff is added on. And part of it is, hey, you know what? We deserve to get paid for the extra efforts that we put through and the things that cost us extra money. So without our ability to simply raise rents any higher, well, sometimes we have to tack on fees to cover a lot of these new regulations, all these additional things that they require. So, one thing that I was considering was, hey, if they are going to make me have an inspection every time a tenant, every year or something, or every time a new tenant moves in, then I'm going to charge the tenant an inspection fee, right? And so if the tenant has to pay that fee, guess what? It makes the housing less affordable for the tenant, but it doesn't hit me at all. Okay. So, I mean, this is the end result when you have too much government regulation. Do you think we're not going to pass those costs on to the tenant? We will. We absolutely will. And we will not feel bad about it because you're the ones who thought all this stuff was necessary, not us. Okay, we were already doing everything required. 99% of us were doing everything required. Yeah, there's a few bad actors out there, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about the overwhelming majority of landlords who are doing everything right. And you decided you wanted to punish us, so we're going to pass that cost on to the end customer, which is the renter. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. As a landlord, what different fees or additional charges do you charge to a tenant? I mean, I know we all do. We all do. Now, some of them go further than others, but you know what? I have no problem with any of them as long as the tenant is made aware of them before, or when they sign the lease, okay? So anyway, let's get into this article because you know what? They're attacking us landlords for, simply put, trying to make money at our businesses. So let's get into it. This article is coming from publicola.com and it says, landlords target renters with predatory junk fees. Yeah, and they call them junk fees, right? Are they? Well, we'll talk about that. Let's go in the article here. Last summer, Seattle renter Jake Thones received a written notice from his landlord demanding that he remove the potted plants from his balcony within 10 days. That might sound absurd, especially given that Thones' lease permitted planting flowers on balconies. But here's the kicker. The notice came with a $75 notice fee. This hefty fee was charged for preparing and giving the notice that the plants had to go. When President Joe Biden announced an offensive against junk fees in his State of the Union address, many renters around the United States must have been nodding their heads knowingly. The nation's 44 million renter households, especially tenants of corporate landlords, are facing an explosion of bogus fees. Well, who says they're bogus, right? So when we look at the $75 notice fee, right, and they call this a ridiculous fee. Well, guess what? Somebody had to go and post the notice, okay, and that person gets paid. Do they not? And somebody had to prepare the notice for you, etc. So the real thing is, the real reason they put all of these fees and everything on is, one, they want to ensure compliance, right? So we're like, hey, if we tell you that we don't want plants on the balconies, well, you're going to get punished a little bit if you decide to break the rules, or stretch the rules. Now, I don't know if for certain, if they actually allowed plants on the balcony or not, like this tenant said, right? Maybe this tenant was mistaken about what the rules regarding plants on the balcony was, right? But if they don't want that on the balcony, right? Well, they have to figure out some way to get you to comply. And guess what? You're going to pay attention when you have this $75 fee tacked on, okay? It's kind of the same logic behind when you have people getting traffic tickets, okay? So, how do you get people to stop speeding? Well, you give them a speeding ticket. And guess what? Maybe they'll slow down a little bit and they won't drive as crazy. Well, this works with the landlord as well. How do you stop people from breaking the rules within the apartment complex? Well, you can give them a little fee, make them pay a little bit extra every time they break the rules. When President Joe Biden announced, oh, I'm sorry, I already read that. Like the hidden charges that appear when you buy a ticket to a sporting event, these fees are not correlated with any tangible service being provided or with any special effort or cost incurred by businesses. They are predatory fees that landlords charge simply because they can, and today's rental market appears to be amplifying rather than correcting them. Rental junk fees are arguably more noxious than those attached to consumer purchases. They can cause families to lose their housing and become homeless. They can tank people's credit scores and imperil their ability to successfully apply for rental housing in the future. Yeah, because if you don't pay, just like if you don't pay your rent, you don't pay, and you agreed, believe me, if you have a rental notice fee, that is written into the lease. If you didn't read the lease, guess what? That's on you. Okay? You knew that these fees were possible the moment you decided that you wanted to live in this place. The landlord informed you about all of the fees that you might have to pay if you break the rules or whatever. Okay, so don't act surprised afterwards. You're like, well, where does this fee come from? It's just like they use the example of purchasing tickets for a sporting event, right? Well, yeah, they tack a lot of fees onto that, right? But they tell you about all those fees, and you can cancel that purchase if you don't want to make that purchase at the end. You're like, well, man, the ticket was $100, but with all these fees, it's like $200 now. Well, if you don't want to pay $200, you don't have to. Nobody's making you live there. There's plenty of landlords who do not have the fees. And I think what this really comes down to is, though, that a lot of people, they don't read the lease or they don't pay attention when the landlord is telling them what fees are in the lease. Okay. They just, hurry up and sign. They want to move into the place as quickly as possible. And then they act shocked and surprised. It's kind of like when you are signing up for a new service or program online and they put like an agreement in there at the beginning, and you just scroll through real quick and then click I accept. Well, maybe you should read that. Maybe you should make a intelligent decision on whether you really want to comply with the terms that are within it or not, because when you sign, well, guess what, you agreed to those fees. Now, the real question is, they always say, well, these fees are absurd and they're junk fees, and there's no cost attached to them for the landlord. Who's making that decision? You, the tenant? No. Maybe there really is a cost involved. Maybe that is why we have these fees. Maybe that is something that you just wouldn't understand as the tenant because you don't operate a business like we do. Notice delivery fees like the one imposed by Phone's landlord are becoming more common, according to Devin Glaser, an attorney who represents tenants in legal disputes with their landlords. More often than not, the landlords just surprise people with a fee after delivering a notice, he said, but sometimes a new policy is officially announced. Hello, residents. The property manager at Sorrento Flats Apartments in Seattle began in an email to tenants in December 2022. Sorrento will now be implementing notice fees. This means that any notices given in regards to lease violations and or past due payments will accrue a notice fee. The notice fee is $50 and will be issued per violation. So yeah, the landlord actually made the people aware of these new fees that were coming up, and guess what? Nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I sit here and I wonder sometimes that they are trying their best to make it as difficult as possible for landlords to do our business, right? They're mad that we want to charge fees. If they don't understand why we're charging them, they don't understand that, hey, we have costs that we need to cover. And I think, especially because this article takes place in the city of Seattle, right? And Seattle has put so many restrictions on everything that a landlord can do, okay? On how easy it is for a landlord to evict a tenant, on how easy it is for a landlord to raise the rent. And if you do remove a tenant, you might have to pay moving costs, etc. Right? Well, how do they think we're going to recover some of the lost money that we experience due to all of their laws and their rules and their regulations? We're going to, if we can't raise the rent, we're going to find ways to charge additional fees to cover all of the additional costs. Okay. So if you want to blame anybody for this, you can go down, you can look at the politicians that you elected who put all of these anti landlord laws into place. Because in the end, right, we are going to do the best thing we can for our businesses in order to make money and survive.